There are two leading nuclear powers in the world: Russia, with 5,889 warheads, followed by the United States, with 5,244. Compared to these two giants, the nuclear arsenals of other nations are relatively insignificant. China has 410 warheads, France 290, the United Kingdom 225, Pakistan 170, India 164, Israel 90, and North Korea 30. But what if the two nations with the largest nuclear stockpiles join hands? What would happen if U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, were moving toward an agreement? One handshake that could restore bilateral relations frozen under Joe Biden, determine the fate of Kyiv, and reshape Europe's ties with Washington.
At the negotiating table, major powers are repositioning the global order as Russia and the U.S. appear to be drawing closer. Trump and his team are pushing hard to achieve peace in Ukraine. However, this leader is sidelining Europe and Kyiv. This has raised concerns among U.S. allies that Washington may pressure Ukraine into accepting unfavorable conditions, such as territorial concessions or using its natural resources to repay the aid it has received from the U.S. over more than 3 years of conflict. Meanwhile, the U.S. has refused to provide concrete security guarantees, not only for Ukraine, but has also warned that it will not protect NATO allies under Article 5 if they fail to increase their defense spending. As tensions rise between Europe and its traditional ally, the United States, China is emerging as a military and economic powerhouse. Could these developments be early signs of a new world order taking shape, one that could profoundly impact smaller and mid-sized nations? Unlike his predecessors, Trump's perspective suggests that major powers could divide spheres of influence without interfering in each other's affairs. This approach would completely reshape the global order that the U.S. and the West have spent decades establishing and leading. In the world order that Trump envisions, Ukraine may no longer be considered part of America's sphere of influence. What Trump seeks is a resource deal that secures Washington's interests, recoups the aid money already spent, and aligns with his America First agenda. Even Europe, a longtime U.S. ally, does not seem to hold a particularly significant role in the global order he is shaping. Trump has criticized Europe for what he sees as unfair trade policies against the U.S., while relying too heavily on Washington for security. He argues that the U.S. is separated from Europe by an ocean and remains safe from the continent's instability. Therefore, Trump wants Europe to take responsibility for its own security or contribute proportionally in exchange for American protection. This suggests that Trump believes the current world order has entangled the U.S. in too many foreign ventures without yielding tangible benefits. As a result, he seeks change. The clearest reflection of this perspective is his administration's stance that Russia cannot be solely blamed for what is happening in Ukraine. Trump has also suggested that Ukraine bears some responsibility for the conflict by insisting on joining NATO at all costs. He also blames his predecessor, Joe Biden, for promising to bring Kyiv into the alliance. This perspective is closely aligned with that of Russia. Moscow argues that NATO's eastward expansion has directly threatened its security space, forcing Russia to take action in February 2022 when its security concerns were ignored. This suggests that under Trump, the U.S. may be unwilling to interfere in Russia's sphere of influence and could be moving toward a new global order. The Trump administration's push to shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, is another telling sign. For years, this agency has been a key tool for expanding American influence worldwide. However, Washington is now considering significantly scaling back its programs. This reflects Trump's more pragmatic approach, focusing only on regions that bring tangible benefits to the U.S. While there are warnings that rivals like Russia and China could exploit the closure of such programs to fill the vacuum, this does not seem to concern Trump, as it is not a priority for his administration. The actions of the United States are shaking the current world order to its core. At this moment, Europe sees itself as a global power that cannot afford to remain passive. With its outdated adversarial approach, viewing Russia as the primary threat and seeing the Ukraine crisis as a major disruption to Europe's security structure, the EU is growing increasingly anxious as the US sidelines it. Europe is frustrated that Washington is engaging with Russia without considering the interests of its closest allies. Although Trump has repeatedly dismissed warnings from Kyiv that a Russian victory in Ukraine could lead to further attacks on European nations, the concern remains. Russia, for its part, has repeatedly denied any intention of attacking NATO, arguing that it has no interest in doing so. However, Europe refuses to trust Moscow's assurances. And now, as the U.S., the leading force of NATO, warns that it may no longer defend its allies, European leaders feel as if they have been slapped in the face. These dynamics were the driving force behind the EU's emergency summit on March 6th. As trust in the U.S. as a reliable ally weakens and the pressure to defend Ukraine intensifies, EU nations have agreed to increase defense spending to $800 billion. This marks a significant turning point in Europe's security policy. During the summit, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned of a clear and present threat to Europe. Many EU countries have come to realize that they cannot rely entirely on the United States. This shift has prompted the EU to swiftly adjust its strategy. A new coalition, referred to as the Coalition of Willing, is taking shape under the leadership of France and the UK, with participation from other European nations and global partners such as Canada and Australia. France has proposed a one-month ceasefire in air and naval operations to provide Russia with an opportunity to demonstrate its commitment to peace. This plan has received support from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and is being finalized with the involvement of the UK. It is expected to be presented to the US and Russia in upcoming negotiations. However, ensuring the enforcement of a peace agreement remains a contentious issue. Some countries, including the UK and France, are prepared to deploy troops to Ukraine to maintain peace. Around 10 other nations, such as Spain, Portugal, Denmark, Canada, and Turkey, are considering sending peacekeeping forces, while the Netherlands and Ireland have pledged logistical and technological support. Although the EU lacks direct authority over defense, it can provide financial assistance. During the summit, the EU committed to significantly increasing defense spending and tasked the European Commission with securing additional funding. A €150 billion fund has been established to allow member states to borrow for joint defense investments and support for Ukraine. To facilitate higher military spending, the EU has also decided to ease debt rules, allowing member states to take on more borrowing to expand their defense budgets. If all EU nations raise their defense spending to an average of 1.5% of GDP, total military expenditures could increase by €650 billion over the next 4 years. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has been one of the most vocal advocates for this shift, arguing that the war in Ukraine, America's new policy toward Europe, and Russia's arms buildup present unprecedented challenges. He insists that Europe must join this arms race and win. EU leaders are becoming increasingly aware that Europe must take responsibility for its own security, managing its own affairs, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Meanwhile, what about the great power watching from the sidelines? Setting Europe aside, both Trump and Putin understand that they cannot establish a new world order without China. However, the US and Russia have different calculations regarding Beijing's role. In recent years, Russia has moved closer to China under the pressure of international sanctions. Moscow believes that the era of a Western-led unipolar order is over, and that it is time for Russia and its partners to have a stronger voice in global affairs. Russia and China's push to expand the BRICS bloc into a counterweight to the G7 has raised concerns in Washington. Trump has warned of imposing tariffs ranging from 100% to 150% on BRICS nations if they attempt to undermine the dominance of the US dollar. Additionally, Russia is strengthening military ties with US adversaries, such as Iran in the Middle East and North Korea in East Asia. The growing alignment between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran presents a significant challenge to the US and its allies, especially since the Trump administration views China as America's primary competitor. Thus, the US desire to strengthen cooperation with Russia may be Washington's attempt to drive a wedge between Moscow and Beijing. The US understands that the closer Russia and China align, the more challenging scenarios Washington may face in the future. The US and Russia have also proposed economic cooperation projects in energy and the Arctic. This could be a strategic move by Trump to create tangible benefits for Moscow, preventing Russia and China from becoming even more entrenched allies. On the other hand, the US pressure and refusal to accept Ukraine into NATO could send a message to Russia that Washington cares about Moscow's security interests. The US seems to be trying to separate Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran rather than uniting them into one bloc, as the combined strength of these four nations could be far more formidable. However, whether this strategy will succeed remains an open question. These four countries have already formed strong links. Without support from European allies, the U.S. could face challenges in reshaping the global order. What do you think if the world order truly shifts this way? Let's discuss in the comments below. For now, goodbye and see you next time.